7, 6, 5 to pass. 4, 3,
and run the cancel.
1.
You're listening to the 50,000 watt clear channel voice of news radio.
3, 2.
Hello, I'm Deborah Carter, host for Gaining a Voice. The media is made up of individual journalists, and as individuals, they have their own views and attitudes about the world. These attitudes can sometimes be perceived as biased reporting, stereotyping, wrongful portrayal, and even distortions. Can you or your group change attitudes of journalists? Can you affect the way the media represents you? In this program, you'll see what resources are available to help you when you feel you've been misrepresented in the media, and how you can take control of your media image.
I mean, the media is owned by very powerful corporate interests.
I think we're biased against groups that the middle class of this country are biased against because we don't know anything about them.
The media will not say a white man has raped a woman. They will say a woman was raped by a man. They do not say a white man. However, if it was a black man, they will tell you a black youth, a black teenager, a black male has raped a woman.
If there is a crime and they would say, well, the person who did so-and-so was a Muslim. Well, how come you didn't say the person who did another thing was a Christian or a Jew or whatever?
It's really devastating to people, these stereotypes and this kind of discrimination.
It's always a battle when we want the media. It's always very, very difficult to get the media out for anything to do with poverty.
The fact of the matter is, I think that the poverty groups and the far left wing has certainly got its message across. I think it's generally accepted without question. And one of the things I'm trying to do now is start to question some of these.
I don't think we've engaged in any poor action, not through the news pages of the Globe.
The Toronto Star used the occasion of our having something to say as a way to attack us and to say that we were ignorant and stupid, in effect, that we didn't go along with these important values.
Only when a problem arises, that's when they come to these communities and they start writing the wrong things about the communities.
There are journalists and editors who will tell you, we can only write this kind of stuff if you're knocking on the door of the office every day and making a fuss.
Only by making a fuss will groups gain media attention. Is this because the media are biased against some groups and not others?
Right. Oh, right.
In newsrooms, journalists report, comment, and influence attitudes. But are journalists biased?
No, I can't say that the media are biased. Certainly every individual that works in the media, like every individual that works in government or at Ford, come to their jobs with points of view, with certain experiences. And obviously you have, we are not automatons just because we work in the media. So we all have our own views of the world. I mean, I guess the difference between a biased journalist and an unbiased journalist is can you keep your opinions to yourself and try and sort, your own personal biases from the facts at hand.
Am I biased? Absolutely. I'm biased against certain things. I'm biased in favor of certain things. The myth of objectivity is precisely that. It's a myth. Never has existed, thank God. The point is not to be objective because you can't. The point is to be fair. And by fair, I don't mean balanced. I don't mean on the one hand, on the other hand. I mean being fair, giving parties their chance to speak.
The Ottawa Citizen, the Ottawa Sun, and television stations and radio stations are not interested in what we do, the real good things, our participation, our contributions to the society. They're not interested in that. They're interested in looking for something. When we do something wrong, they come after us and they really blow it out of proportion, headlines, front page, and everything else.
The point of a news story is not to tell people rise up and overthrow your oppressors. They may be more comfortable doing that on the editorial page, but In the news pages, what we generally do is report fact, what's happening, why it's happening, what people are saying about it, what sort of suggestions people have to improve the situation.
Yeah, do you know that? With small schools.
Many ethnic groups feel misportrayed by the media because often the media does not know them.
And the other one is
the milling around after the prayers have finished. And
Muslims on this continent face the difficult task of educating the surrounding society about their faith, customs, and traditions.
And they usually typically...
In the Western media, Islam is often linked with terrorism, and for this reason, Muslims often feel that their religion has been wrongly portrayed in the media.
When we talk about something being Islamic, it's something to be revered and something to be respected. You would pick up a paper, any paper, it says Islamic radicals, terrorists, Islamic terrorists, and Islamic fundamentalists is everyday occurrence.
And even though there's other terrorism all over the world that has nothing to do with Muslims, but it isn't brought out that way, it isn't exposed that way in the media. But once it's a Muslim thing or from an Arab country, it's just brought out. And it's really hard for the children to deal with because they don't understand. It hurts the adults, but it really confuses the children.
Another thing that I would like to see happening in the Muslim community is that when a negative, something negative or un-Islamic or something that has been interpreted wrongly about Islam and about Muslims comes on the media, we have to react to that, and we don't do enough of that. If something appears in the newspapers, we have to write letters and say, okay, this is not who we are. This is who we are. And we have to participate more in terms of going out there and giving a positive image, of our religion and of our beliefs and things like that.
Younger Muslims are taking positive steps by sharing with the media images of themselves, their faith, and their customs.
Tell his own troops his side of the Rwanda story.
Journalists are always interested in hearing your feedback about a story, an issue, or an event and how it was covered. If you're unhappy with your media coverage, the simplest, most direct way of taking control of it is to go directly to the source.
It's up to you. If there was a complaint about a specific story, in other words, if somebody was calling to say, gee, I didn't like the way you wrote about X or Y, the best bet always is to begin close to the source, so that if they have not phoned the reporter, they would be phoning the editor responsible for that reporter. And the best way to do that is just look at where that story appears in the paper. If it's a story that's in the business section, for example, the best policy is to call the business editor. If it's a story that appears in the entertainment section, call the entertainment editor. If it's something that can't be resolved, it sometimes ends up with me. In other words, if a customer or a reader has a discussion with an editor and they're not satisfied with the way it turned out, then I would be the person they would probably come to next.
Groups with controversial ideas or who are critical of the media may find themselves being ignored. This is the case with Real Women, established in 1983 to defend traditional family values.
We saw the very foundation of society, which is the family, seem to be disintegrating.
And we are not against women having careers, but we do realize that most women would like to have a balance of their work life and home life. And certainly when children are very young, most mothers would like, if they possibly can, to have more of the balance on the home side. But this is not the message that the media elites and the women who are sort of running the agenda, and the man, let's say, are very interested in hearing.
Much of the media have presumed that they have an intellectual and moral superiority all over ordinary people, and that they have a right to present their views, which are always right, and everybody else has to fall in line.
It was interesting. My sister took a case to the CRTC against Peter Mansbridge about 8 years ago. He had totally misrepresented our daycare policy he had said we were against daycare, which we are not. We are not against daycare. It's universal daycare, state daycare we're against. And she took a case to the CRTC. He said, no, that was ridiculous, that he had not misrepresented real women at all. CRTC said, yes, you did, and from now on, you would better make sure you don't do that kind of thing, and we were never covered again on the national news.
My name is Phil Lind, and I'm Vice Chair at Rogers Communications.
The CRTC is the ultimate authority for broadcasting in Canada. Your complaint to the CRTC about a broadcaster has the power to affect its broadcasting license.
The CRTC is an independent federal agency, and it's charged with overseeing the Canadian broadcasting and Canadian telecommunications industries. So this means basically that it regulates and supervises radio, television, cable, and other program distribution undertakings, as well as telephone and other telecommunication services.
To an additional tax on the rich, I don't think they contribute enough to government coffers as it is now, but I would suggest...
It's my impression that radio stations, television stations do not like to get adverse comment from the public, and because they're very sensitive to ratings and that sort of thing, if you make a reasonable presentation about a concern that you have to them, then it will have an effect.
If an individual or community group has a concern about a specific licensee, the programming by a specific licensee, they can certainly file a complaint about the programming of that licensee. Now, if the complaint is about a specific program, that complaint should be filed as soon as possible, because broadcast licensees are only required to keep tapes of their programs for 4 weeks.
Canada has been calling them and saying, you know, we're in a...
Before going to the CRTC, there are simpler, faster ways to seek a correction from a broadcaster. Complaints about private broadcasters should be addressed to the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council.
An individual should feel perfectly comfortable about going to their local radio or television station in the first place if they had a problem. No need to come to us in the first place. But if they either don't know how to get to the radio or television station, or for whatever reason want to come to us first, we'll make sure that the complaint gets to the local station. And from the local station, they should expect within 2 weeks to get a response from someone to the issue they raised.
News Talk Radio, 580 CFRA. You're listening to Lowell Green at 521 Talk on 580 CFRA.
Island of Sanity Network. Off to Winnipeg, Doug.
No station that we have yet found wants to be wrong, because what happens in the long run is that this may reflect on them with respect to the CRTC. They like, in general, the fact that they work through us. We're a friendlier body to the public. We're an easier body for the broadcasters to deal with because we're sort of light on our feet. We don't have cumbersome bureaucratic machinery. We can operate quickly and we can operate effectively.
The National with Lori Brown.
Head one,
and
mix
Peter
one.
Hansbridge.
And dissolve. Cue and push.
Good evening. Jean Chrétien has enlisted some new
53 will be
soldiers
next
from
up.
Quebec.
Unity.
If you are unhappy with the CBC, you can file a complaint with the CBC Ombudsman.
The journalists themselves are accountable for what they do. And if someone, a listener of CBC Radio or a viewer of CBC television, has a complaint, they can direct the complaint to this office. It is what I do then, or what the Ombudsman does, and the policy is to share this letter of complaint or expression of complaint directly with the programmers involved so that they have the first opportunity to reply. If the listener or the viewer is dissatisfied with the complaint, the Ombudsman can then, if requested by the complainant, intervene and conduct an independent review to determine whether or not CBC's journalistic policies and practices have been fully observed by the journalist involved.
there were approximately 40 people there, many of whom I knew personally. I would say that we were a representative group of small C conservatives. There were some young men who were in the Reserve Army, and so they had short hair and they had army boots. And there were a mixture of people. The Toronto Sun subsequently produced an article saying 40 racists attend meeting. Now, it was a small article, only maybe 100 words or less, but I was struck by the circumstance that I didn't like being called a racist.
Any complaints about the print media can be brought to regional or provincial press councils. The Ontario Press Council was formed in 1972 by 8 Ontario newspapers.
What happens is if you make a complaint, a committee is set up to hear you. You're given the right to state your case. The newspaper says it wasn't like that at all. You say, oh, yes, it was, and here is further detail. And the newspaper says, really, you haven't got it right. And then the members of the panel ask you questions, and you're allowed to respond. The newspaper can respond as well. And then both sides are given a final word. And then the newspaper and the complainant leaves the room. The committee talks for some time over where they go, and a report is made to the whole press council, which will then decide whether to reject or accept the committee's report.
It isn't a panacea. It won't do anything wonderful for you. But the press council, for example, paid my airfare to and from Toronto. They would have paid other expenses, meals, hotel accommodation if necessary. They're very generous and they're very helpful. Now, the result is generally they insist on a statement being published indicating that the newspaper had done something wrong.
The newspapers hate to be caught out. Really dislike it. You'd think, what kind of authority or weight do the judgments of the press council have? Well, in my 8 years' experience, the newspapers really complained bitterly when we found against them, which we did on a number of occasions.
But in the end, they were all required, and even the Ottawa Sun did, to publish a statement put out by the press council, which said that the article had been incorrect.
There are issues where, and these are always I found fascinating, where a group in society is mentioned as being the group to which a person belongs, and it's unnecessary to give that identification. Caribbean Canadians in Toronto, Asian Canadians in Hamilton, where people get into difficulties, and instead of just saying, a woman did this or a man did that, the race question, the ethnic question is made part of the story. And those are very interesting to listen to, because it's a question of where a society's decision of fairness goes.
Whenever a crime was committed by somebody who happens to be black, they would first mention the fact that the ethnic or the racial origin of the person is black, sometimes out of context. If they were doing it for the purposes of describing the individual who committed a crime, there's no problem. If they are doing it to somehow portray or further the idea that blacks are criminals, then there's a problem.
If this means that the governments will...
Chinese are by nature compulsive gamblers. They are also...
As a result of an overtly racist broadcast, Canadians of Chinese descent approached the journalist of the local TV station and turned this issue into a learning experience for them and the broadcaster.
CJOH did apologize with some reservations. It was sort of a non-apology. We're sorry if you're upset. We had no intent to produce a racist programming, but we think your protests are valid. But if you're upset, we recognize that. Later, I spoke to the reporter, and he said, well, I was right near the end and I didn't quite know what to say, so I just said the first thing that came to mind. Like, you know how French are, great lovers and Italians are great cooks. Well, he said all I could think of was the Chinese are gamblers. And so that's what he said. But in a way, that program has been very instructive. It was so bad that it's actually been a very good teaching tool. And it has been used by school teachers. It has been used, I know, at Carleton as a vivid example of stereotyping. So from a very negative show, I think it has been quite instructive. But I must say, in recent times, we've noticed that CJOH has become much more sensitized, much more sensitive, and has gone out of their way, I think, to cover multicultural issues, to shy away from the stereotypes, and perhaps they have learned a few good lessons.
Chicken? Thank you. Can I help you?
In spite of the many complaints, the media can and does affect positive change. This is the experience of Canadians of Japanese descent. During the Second World War, racism against Japanese Canadians was sanctioned by the government, who forced them to leave their homes and then sold their possessions without their consent. For years, Japanese Canadians were silent about these injustices. This silence was broken in 1980 when Canadian journalists started investigating the internment. This encouraged Japanese Canadians to seek redress.
So if there's some type of situation, where there was racism involved, and then you could say, look. I think there were a number of people in our community who always felt that what happened to Japanese Canadians in 1942 shouldn't have happened. They really questioned the validity of the argument that it was for security reasons that they were doing this. The one thing that we did as part of our strategy is that we met with editorial boards of the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the Ottawa Citizen, and we felt that those are the key people. So we would meet with them, explain our position, and lo and behold, a few days after, we would get a positive editorial. And I think that helped within our own community as well, because there were a number of people within our own community who questioned why we were pursuing it. They had fears that there would be backlash. There were fears that nothing will happen anyways because government is such a large body. Why are you just bringing this up now?
In the mid-'80s, the media's attention to the redress issue gave it momentum and public support. Finally, in 1988, the Prime Minister of Canada extended a formal apology to Japanese Canadians for the injustices they suffered during and after the Second World War.
Taking control of your media image means responding effectively to images that are hurtful to you or your group. It means taking the time to contact journalists, letting them know what your concerns are and why. It means changing attitudes. Changing attitudes is a long, slow process that takes time and patience. But first, you have to gain media attention. Gaining a Voice is a television series about gaining media attention. Each program explains an aspect of the media to help you and your group organize your message and your media campaign so that it's clear, focused, and factual. I'm Deborah Carter. Good luck in gaining your voice.